So without further ado, I want to introduce Raul, who's tonight's presenter. And Raul is now 88 years old, started collecting in 1959, and was one of the co-founders of the National Carousel Association in 1974. Raul is from Palos Verdes Peninsula in California, has 4 adult children, and is a virtual Illions family member. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Raul, who's going to give us an incredible presentation. By the way, Raul asked if you please hold all of your questions until the end after he's finished presenting. And you probably know, you just hold down the space bar in order to ask a question at the end. So Raul, it's all yours.
Thank you very, very much, Bob. And I'm so happy to be able to do this program. It's a couple months late because I had COVID for the October obligation. We'll.
We hear you. We hear you all good.
Yeah, but my slides aren't moving. We had that.
Let's see if that frees it up.
Okay, great. I like to start any such presentation with appreciation and recognition of my long lost love, Joe, who is responsible for anything I've ever done with carousels. She was born in love with horses, had a traumatic experience when her favorite Long Beach Pike burned down when she was barely 10 years old. She spent her life in kind of a post-traumatic determination to restore carousels. And I just fell into that. It took me a couple of years to understand what was going on. But then it was a major pillar of our life activities. Tonight, we examined the 2 giants in Coney Island, 2 people who found one another for a purpose and could never get together for friendship. I won't bear on that, but we will show you their major productions over some 20 years. And we'll talk about Mangels. This is William F. Mangels and Marcus Charles Illions, who likes to be called Mike, or at least he did. Starting with Mangels. Mangels was kind of a born engineer. He had an intuitive sense of shape and metal, and he could visualize how to put things together, how to make them move in a way that was entertaining for sale on a midway. And he succeeded throughout his active life as a leader in the outdoor entertainment industry. His most notable invention is the whip, and this antique whip car, I think, is charming for its period decoration. In his lifetime, he made lots of patents for lots of things in lots of fields. Carousels, amusement rides, swimming pool wave machines, and through all, starting and ending with shooting galleries and their targets. Very, very productive guy. He loved doing work in miniature. His hobby was building models of roller coasters. And here he is in his personal workshop working on some small part. And here we have Marcus Charles Illions on his favorite horse, Bob. Bob could pull a carriage. He could race as a saddle horse. He could race in a chariot race, essentially. And Marcus himself grew up in a neighborhood of horses. His father was a horse trader. He grew up among horses, learned to ride very early. And behind him is his rather gracious manor on Ocean Parkway. I'm not exactly sure when he was able to move here, but it was within the first couple years of the century. That is the 20th century. Behind that building is an expansive backyard with a large building housing the carving shop and the paint shop, as well as an accessory building for the steam engine to run the machine shop. We're dead again.
No, you should be alive.
I'm very sorry for any delay. Okay, we may have to do it manually. This is a shop. We'll see a little of it later, and we can't dwell on it. But along the right-hand side are 4 carving benches. At the very foreground is Rudy Illions, his 3rd son, his 3rd child. And the master himself is there in the middle. All these folks are trying to hold very still while they look like they're working, because the magnesium flare takes a while to expose that slow film. Behind Marcus Charles is Philip, the 2nd-born son, who was the company manager as well, and who assembled the designs of the horses as the separate pieces were carved by others. Over on the left side is Mr. Gutge, who is running a OSHA nightmare machine. That's a bandsaw with a mouth of about 12 inches. And not only is that dangerous, because you could lose your arm in it, but on the floor you see all these heads with facets carved to bring them halfway into round. He does that all hand holding this block of wood and feeding it into the blade, curbing it as he holds it. And above his head is an impromptu shelf board on some body boxes with a line of experimental heads. We'll see that Illions never stopped trying to change his style and to update according to his impulses. I think that's one of the conflicts between him and Mangels. Mangels had an output to control, and he wasn't about to wait while Illions invented a new style. I think he probably had his favorite styles and didn't want them changed. Or maybe he had styles that Illions didn't want to change to. Never know, but we do know that it was never quite a happy time in the shops, the separate shops of Mangels and Illions. Each had his own place. Each lived about a mile or 2 apart on Ocean Parkway. They had families that didn't interact, but they made beautiful machines together. Cool.
No, see if you can. There you go.
Okay. One of the themes through this story will be keeping track of those changes of carving styles. You'll see I've named 5 of them over the 30 years or so of Illions' carving activity. Most of them were done with Mangels, and the last 2 were done when he was on his own. This is only to introduce a document you won't see in its entirety. It's the Illions Archives collection of 50 8x10 glossy prints, illustrating favorite horses, some text, and Barney Illions, the youngest son, who with Rudy was like brothers to me, and Joe, loaned this to me, and we made sets of contact prints out of 8x10 negatives, which were very clear, and we'll be able to use those pictures for close-ups in detail on any of the images we're highlighting. We have here Illions and Mangels' first catalog. Named Illions first only because he's the artist who drew this. I'm sure Mangels dictated the elements. I should explain for a moment that I'm blind in the center of my eyes. So when Holly is running the pointer to what she's showing, I may miss what she's herself selecting. But you see, overhead is the banner of W.F. Mangels, and to the left is a fancy rim and the design that we'll see again and again through the era, and that's festoons or swags of cabbage roses strung across the scenery, the rim section, covered at the joints with a fancy shield. And we'll be seeing that from time to time. Looking more closely, it's very sprightly cover. They seem to be having fun doing it, and this couple seems to be having a great time riding a horse. If you look above the couple, there's an interesting structure that is resting on the interior platform. It's a column on which sits a barber pole-like thing, and you can see a ring of lights below the barber pole and above. And on top of the little platform is a Cupid figure holding up a light bulb. Understand, of course, in 1900, lights in Coney Island were the draw and the competitive advantage. Across the street was Luna Park for most of the time, and they boasted millions of light bulbs. And so you'll see that Mangels tried to keep up in the machines he produced. So the first alliance, the hurdlers. Mangels got a jump ahead of the industry when he was able to obtain and design patents for the Savage, the English Savage system of overhead cranks to keep the horses moving smoothly up and down. With that advantage, Mangels was ready to sweep the system. And he was ready to make big frames. He needed a carver suitable for his mechanism. And the word in Coney Island was, if you want a good carver, you go to Mike Illions. So I'm sure he sought Illions out for an interview. I think it's probably despite their mutual instant antagonism that Mangels decided it was worth the rough to get the quality. And so in 1900, they put their first merry-go-round together. And just to show off this innovation of an actually moving riding horse, he didn't just make a 2-abreast or a 3-abreast standard mechanism. His first merry-go-round is a 4-abreast, a massive weight, many dozens of horses resting on their platform, all suspended from a single bearing at the top. Took good engineering to create that kind of structure without short time failure. Here it is, the hurdlers. Looking at the top, the rim is decorated with ribbons of beveled glass mirrors, and each of the shields has some animal head. Notably over here is a Boston Terrier with a black eye. Coming down to the organ, it's fairly ornate. And Holly, you said there are some cherubs decorating that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who's on the corner.
Yeah, and then to the side of the chariot, especially on the left, think in greater detail, we'll see one of those barbershop pedestals. Looking at the horses, I'd like to focus on the one in the corner. You'll see that these are called, I'm calling the pre-Feltman style. They're kind of plain. The trappings are at shallow depth and fairly flat. And they were called in the trade the hobby horse style or gait, because no living horse could move anything but down on this kind of gait. It's not really jumping, it's just floating. Illions soon got away from this and began ridiculing others who continued to use it. As soon as this was built, Mangels installed it on the old iron pier. That is not a pier made of iron, it's the wooden pier of the Iron Steamship Company. And thousands of people came every week from Manhattan to disembark onto this pier. And on leaving the entrance hall, they were met with loud organ music and a big, heavy, rumbling machine offering jumping horses to ride. It was a great sales choice. Many professionals came to check it out. Many orders were born by carnies who would come to see this mechanism. Ultimately, he put it up for sale, and it was sold to J.J. Hurley in Revere Beach. And at that point, it became known as Hurley's Hurdlers. Here is Hurley and his crew on that same merry-go-round out of the Mangels catalog number 3, showing some of the recent productions. And as even the best of mechanisms goes, and even the best painted and varnished horses go, carousels do wear out. And unless they're intensively renovated, they'll be replaced. In this case, the local paper in Revere Beach announces that the beloved Hurley's Hurdlers has been sold, and sold to Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus World in Barnum City, Florida. Here's one of the horses on a pallet without a cover in a kind of a rickety warehouse. And ultimately, the park decided never to build another carousel. They already had a PT go. So these horses, what I'm calling the pre-Feltman style Illions horses, were sold at auction, one of which we can get up close and personal to in Lorinda Bray's studio in Irwindale, California. I'd like to demonstrate the features starting at the nose. The nostril is flaring. If you looked at it from the front, it flares out like outlying headlights and flares so widely that it leaves wrinkles behind the nostril. And in these early carvings, you'll see 3 distinct grooves demonstrating those wrinkles. The thing that I first noticed that kept me from even recognizing this as an Illions is this mile-high triangle that forms the brow. It rises way above the skull and raises onto the sight line of the muzzle itself. And looking now back, we can see the mane. We'll see it better in a full view of the horse. And it is kind of styled by Illions from his experience working for Charles Loof before the turn of the century. And it's kind of a tangled bunch of curls. The mane tends to rise up, curl over, and drop down, often freestanding in its arch, leaving what we call peepholes. The decorations along the body are fairly flat, but gently modeled with patterns, and certainly not atypical for Illions horses and other carvers is a winged angel as a decoration and ornament behind the cantle. We'll move on. All of a sudden, we have a brand new order. Amazingly, once this carousel, once the hurdlers started spinning on the iron walk, it became famous within the trade. And before they could really settle the hurdlers, the board of directors of a interurban rail line called Albany and Hudson Railway Company decided they wanted to build a park halfway between their 2 stations. And they called it Electric Park. And like most people searching for a merry-go-round at that time, were sent in search of a Mangels. So the spring of 1901, or the midwinter, was spent building a whole new carousel. And this was at the Electric Park in Kinderhook, New York. Kinderhook is a hook-shaped lake on which the park was built. And through the magic of postcards, we're going to take a tour through that very fancy park before we see the carousel. Here we are, having left Albany. This crowd of smartly dressed people is getting off the trolley. It's a holiday or a weekend day because there are 2 trolleys tethered for moving larger crowds. And take a look to the left at the excitement of this young woman who is running to get into the gate. Her parents aren't catching up because this park is widely advertised, even from its beginning, as specially designed to be protective and safe for women and children. It may be hard for us to keep up with this little girl, but we're going to try. And she's running down. She'll ignore the Ferris wheel. She'll ignore the boat rental because off in the distance, she can see the carousel. And we see that it's resting on a platform in the lagoon, and it can be reached by a bridge. I hope our little girl will keep her eyes on the road because it's a winding gravel path before we get there. But soon we're on the bridge and we can see the carousel not far ahead. What we're going to see is some special carousel and some special hand-painted postcard. I want to introduce you to a ritual that seemed to be prevalent when the inaugural photograph of the carousel is taken for ads and postcards and that sort of thing. The carousel is packed with people, and in the center, there is a pose, usually in front of the organ, of a king horse with a young lady sitting on the saddle, usually just sitting frontward, not side saddle. And she and the horse are surrounded by officials of the company in this case, and often city officials and protective other children and women. And here, in that center space, we can see a bit of the organ and the girl on the saddle. Most importantly, if we go over to the left, we can see a jumper. It's certainly not a pre-Feltman style. We can't see it too well because it's been painted rather dark and there's a shadow across the head. So I want to take us now to a contemporary horse on display at one time in the Merry-Go-Round Museum in Sandusky, Ohio. And it will introduce an early version of the Veltman style. I think we can expand this one. Yeah. We'll start at the nostrils again, and there's not deep furrows, still little bumps that indicate the wrinkling, but they're not nearly as intensely flared as we saw before. And to my pleasure, the eyes have gone back into the skull and the brow is below the sideline of the muzzle itself. And the really unique development for the Feltman style is this mane. You see that it begins, of course, at the neck, but rises up into a deep folding cove that then trails down into fairly orderly tiers of plates fastened, in this case, part of the carving on the neck. Illions didn't do a lot of application carving. He would have he would call one of the kids to bring him an extra board. He'd glue that onto the uncarved surface to give him the depth he needed for this kind of a mane, which at the top cove there is 5 inches deep. You can put your hand in it up to your wrist practically before you touch the midline. This style to me is spectacular, but so different from the usual that at first Joe and I didn't know what it even was. The decorations along the body are atypical for later versions of the Feltman, not all this scenic material. Here there's even a sphinx on the side. But if there's any doubt that this is an Illions horse, he makes no doubt about who carved it. We've got, I think if we can make it a little bigger, MC Illions, Coney Island. And Coney Island at that time was so famous that most everybody in the country and some around the world would recognize C period, I period as the great playground of Coney Island. Well, it didn't take long. for the word to get out, Mangels kept welding out frames and Illions kept trying to fill them. And so just within 2 years of the electric park, the Boy Blank and Detroit Steamship Company built a playground, an amusement park on what's popularly called Boblo Island. And it was my very favorite birthday destination when we could go from Dearborn to downtown Detroit and board this steamer and cruise probably a half hour down the river and dock at Boblo. And I, perhaps like the little girl we just saw, would run through the gate and run past the merry-go-round and head for the tilt-a-whirl or whatever was a boy-type action ride. It was open for a long time, and I do have pictures of a renovation in 1989. And you can see here the gilded mains, the trappings of the Feltman style. The date is perhaps a premonition. They may have spiffed up this worn carousel in order to sell it, because unfortunately, by the next spring, it was auctioned at the Dearborn Inn. And we see this couple examining one of the horses. And I can't read the sign.
Ornament.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Sorry. I'll try not to get so nervous I can't tell anybody's name. Anyway, even as Mangels was building merry-go-rounds, he was also designing rides. And in the winter of 1903, Luna Park was being built just across what we'll see later as the Feltman Pavilion on Surf Avenue. And Mangels got a subcontract to invent and install rides within the park. And either he or Marcus himself designed these amazing Roman chariot ticket booths. And so these are neatly designed to sell pickets. How's that? To sell tickets. They're hollow through the back so the ticket seller can stand within it. And the shelf at the top holds the tickets and the other paraphernalia. And there's a shield on the front that's pretty obscure, which identifies Luna Park. You can see that they're quite functional. When we look at this postcard and zero down to an array of 4 chariots. All right, 5. For people with eyes, you can count 5 chariots ready to sell tickets and very little room to sneak past. And now we're going to come to I'm calling the 4th alliance, the 4th big carousel they made together. Although in the meantime, Mangels was building other machines. Illions kept up as much as he could with the riding stock. I want to back up here to introduce the Feltman Pavilion in the old days. This is back before the turn of the century. We see the Elephant Hotel there. And for some strange reason, it looks like there's scaffolding surrounding the hotel. Actually, that was called a gravity chute. And you could take an elevator to the top and get in a little car and like a toboggan, go all the way round and round the hotel until he got back to ground. For reference, this was designed and built by a man named Alonzo Shaw. Our particular interest here, though, is the pavilion across the street. That's the Feltman Pavilion before the turn of the century. You see it's 4 tiers, or maybe 3 with a flagpole. And there's a tip of customers already waiting to get in to ride this machine. Later, we see the pavilion from the front. This is around the turn of the century. And anybody looking for this postcard on eBay will be looking will find the tag, the Ziz, as if that's what we're looking at. We're really looking at a big sign, perhaps Illions carved, on top, directing the tip around the corner to the roller coaster enclosed within the Feltman complex. That roller coaster is unique, as was so much designed by Mangels, because rather than a ratchet chain to climb the first hill, Mangels built an electric train fed by a third rail to pull smoothly up that hill. There's even a song written about the Ziz, and not surprisingly, it was written by Alfred Feltman. At least some of the relatives may have gotten along together if their fathers did not. Feltman's complex was a whole block that stretched from Surf Avenue across a whole block and back down the hill all the way to the actual surf. It was later cut a little shorter with the Regelman Boardwalk. It had a large garden as an outdoor dining room, usually serving as the beer garden. There was kind of a German theme that Feltman liked to carry through his work. And here we see in the 30s, it's now making millions of dollars with shore dinners and clam fries in what's arguably the largest restaurants in the world at that time. I'm backing up once more. If you can keep up with the chronology, we had a moment in the 30s, but now we're back just before the turn of the century, I believe, for this unique Illions carved horse. I believe that Illions carved it for himself to use as a banner, as an advertising platform, showing off his work, and he really does it. The Pinto design, the Pinto bodywork, and all the stuff along the torso are a little hard to read here. So I'll give us a blank screen to write on. And we can go to the middle banner. Obviously, even I can read. It says designed and carved by M.C. Illions, or M. Illions, I think. And we're going to see his self-portrait later on the below the cantle. But what I want to show now is these little Cupid figures. Actually, such little boys are rampant throughout the design world back to ancient times, or back even to Grecian times. They are called in Italian, each one is a puto, and the plural is putti. These guys are doing a job. They're working to illustrate with their bodies and their activity what they're adjacent, what they're adjoining on the banner. Because on the left, we have a designer working at his pad, just opposite design. And over on the right, look what we have. We have a little puto raising his arm with the carver's mallet to strike the chisel on a bust he is carving. Arguably, this is a bust of Beethoven, which was Illions' favorite carver. I was so intrigued by this early on that I did a bit of research, wondering if there were predecessor designs like this. And I did learn, I won't bore you with all the details, but there's a whole design world called illustrated alphabets, where designers will design fancy work for a huge capital letter, which can then be used by printers as the initial capital on a paragraph of text. Here we have one of the letter B, and look what's lurking in the lower loop of the B. It's our old friends. And Holly, what would you describe here? I can't see it.
He's got a mallet in his hand and a chisel, and he's working on a torso.
Yeah, there we have it. That's in the engraving and printing world. I found also this book cover, very fancy engraving, very carefully done. The heroic figure in the middle is holding this banner, and the book is entitled Ornaments, which was doubly interesting to see. The heroic figure is the author, for some reason, having a miniature swan on his shoulder, but he's got this placard at his feet, proudly saying that this is invented and designed by Charles Klimt, but not enough to have it in writing. He says it in putti. Here they are again. In this case, they seem to be kind of talking together about how to put this placard together. So it has to be obvious that Illions didn't invent the device of the putti glyphs. However, we weren't so sure when Joe and I walked into a local antique store and saw this desk covered with figures, loaded with nudes, and even at that, we realized it was just too much for Illions and in pretty poor taste. But we'll go up to the one fairly flat area of the piece. And what do we have? We have almost an identical figure to the one on Illions' horse. And on the right, the putoglyph is not actively carving because he's taking a break, but there's obviously a bust that he's working on. Now we look at Illions. I think this is a wonderful bas relief. It's as good as a coin, only a little deeper. It's probably an accurate representation of how he looked in his early manhood. He came over, as I didn't mention, as a teenager, arriving in 1888, right at the height of the great blizzard of '88. He went into the employ of Charles Loof, only to enter into this uneasy alliance a little later with Mangels. Now, the panel or the image that Illions has carved beneath his head makes very little sense and doesn't do justice to the quality of his bas relief. And I doubt if at first glance you can tell what it is, because it's actually two images in one, depending on which way you look at it, from top or from the bottom. And that's called a palindromic figure. If we were to look at that design and crane our heads tightly to the left, what we'd see is premarital bliss. Wow, these two colonial figures are about to kiss with wide smiles and full of joy. But if you turn your head the other way, we get the end of the romance, the loss of the love, the dreary distance of attachment against their will. Maybe it's a premonition of the relationship of the giants, but in this case, it comes from an English novelty that Illions would have seen during his work in England. It's entitled, at the bottom, Courtship, as we see. If you turned it upside down or around, it would be matrimony. I sure don't agree with that spirit. I was never so happy as married. Thank you. Here we see the carousel itself. This is the fabulous Feltman. And there's we might look at the organ for a moment. Catch my breath, folks. Looking down at the horse itself, the strangest thing in this picture is that the portrait horse has been designated as the king horse, flanked with the uniformed crew. And either Illions pushed to get it on there, or Mangels wanted the fanciest horse he knew to head his carousel. It's exceptional because nowhere I've ever seen in anything that Mangels ever published, even including what we'll see in part 2 as his history of the amusement industry, never did he print the word Illions as one of his, our figures are carved by the greatest carvers, never mentioning Illions. But here he is. We can look at another view of the Feltman merry-go-round, unlabeled, but used as the example of the fancy carousels that buyers could have. And we see, if we remember the illustration on the first catalog, we can see that there is a festoon of roses on the rim. It is carved. Later, these are used as painted images.
I mean, when the Chinese were jailing, when they lost
Holly, you can point out the features of this organ.
This is the one that has the 20 some odd horns and the one figure in the center. So it's a fairly plain organ, but then in another picture, it turns out.
Was that the earlier picture?
Yeah, the earlier picture is much more elaborate.
Okay, it turns out, to my surprise, as we researched these things years ago, that the Feltman style was relatively short-lived. We've seen the examples we know, and rather than being sort of the basic style on the Feltman merry-go-round, it was the last of the Feltman style, And here we get a peek in Mangels catalog number 4 of the style to come. Because we have this picture, and if you notice at the bottom of it, it has been sent to L.D. Shaw in Glen Echo, Maryland. That's the same Lorenzo Shaw who designed the gravity chutes around the Elegant Hotel. It's an example of the talent that abounded over time at Coney Island. I was fortunate enough to get a silver halide 5x7 print that may have been the origin for this published version, but it can give us greater enlargement and better detail. You'll see the obligatory children at the front. We're going to focus on the group to the left. And this is not your Feltman style. You may be able to spot that the mane is different, the trappings are simpler, and we'll see that better in the next picture, not now, because this carousel ran for many years until about 1919, when it was decided to retire it. And the park went looking for a new merry-go-round and chose a Densel. So this whole carousel was traded into the Densel factory, William Densel. It was in process for, I'm sorry, I'm getting this a bit confused. Yeah, the Glen Echo Park got a whole Densel machine in trade to this carousel. This carousel at the Densel factory was partly incorporated into their new big carousel being built for the San Francisco Zoo. So as it turned out, this horse can be seen at the Central Zoo, and we can pick out the design elements a little more clearly. There it is. The Densel machine is all standing on the outer row, so this becomes a second row horse. Here we have a clear view of the changes. The nostrils, starting again at the muzzle, are normal muzzles. One possible problem is that the muzzle has been shortened, but the mandible has been shortened even further. So it leaves kind of an awkward gap, which Marianne Stevens, whom many of the carousel people have known, a prominent dealer and collector, she called this the Coke bottle opener jaw. We came to, just as Joe and I had previously called the long muzzle of Feltman a needle nose. So various nicknames crop up in the course of the field. Again, it's the mane that most differs from the earlier horses. It may have been engineer Mangels, who was probably an optical engineer as well as a mechanical one, to realize that the rope-like plates of hair on the Feltman style were so rounded that half of the light from the gilt radiates sideways. So you don't get the full brilliance that the gilt could afford. So he probably argued that if Illions would only flatten out those ropey things, he could have flattish ribbon-like manes that would reflect almost all of the light. I'm not sure how happy Illions was at first with that, But in fact, we'll see in later pictures with gilded manes that worked very well. There's also a very pretty little angel behind the saddle. Now, on the NCA tour to San Francisco last September, I took a notion to ride on that horse. I'm kind of lame and weak, and I hadn't ridden a carousel horse on a machine for 5 or 6 years. It took a village to get me onto the platform and to get me hoisted up to saddle level, and another half of the village to pull my leg into a straddle. But miraculously, I was on top. And this ride gave me a new appreciation of the carousel as a whole, and what can be a really exciting experience for anyone who can get into it. Because it's not just the horse you're riding. And I was delighted to be able to pet that horse and find unexpected contours as I stroked it. But where was I going with that?
The wonder of the round, going
you,
around
right.
and surrounded by.
The fact of being encased in a machine of massive steel and lumber that left you cocooned within a magical ride that went round and round and up and down. Mangels really got it right. And merry-go-rounds really can be fun. Now we've got another big merry-go-round built very shortly after the Feltman. Feltman was probably installed, we haven't gotten there yet, have we? Yeah, that was probably installed around 1906. So just after that, Willow Grove Park was built for the Municipal Park of Philadelphia, a grand sprawling bunch of grass designed by Olmsted, who did Central Park in Manhattan. It had a sturdy Philadelphia toboggan built building, and we can go up those labeled steps. You may notice that label on the step to the left of the entrance. We can enter into the building to see the carousel. Of course, it's an inaugural shot, so we have the obligatory young women riding their horse. And we can focus for time's sake on just the young lady on the left, just to the right of the poster, the pillar. Pretty horse, nothing unusual, but it does show the strap-like leathers that are typical for the Stubman style. They were sometimes belts of conche or plain leathers, which would be jeweled and give a great spot to rest the jewels. There's another unusual horse on this machine that I'll show if we move to the left. That is a gorgeous armored horse with a blanket that covers the whole body, with tassels or fringe and very large jewels. We'll see another one looks almost like this, but with a distinction. I'm holding my breath, even though there's little of it, when I anticipate showing the Seven Rock Park carousel. I think it's the most beautiful that Mangels ever made. I think it's the most mysterious carousel that Mangels ever made, because there's too much Illions on it. It's as if it's a clearinghouse for Illions masterpieces. So let's look at it as it arrived maybe in 1909. I'd like to see a more accurate date for that, but here is the Savin Rock Mangels Illions merry-go-round. One of the things I especially like about it, because of my fondness for the petroglyphs, is that they have been painted into the scenery panels at the top. And the one that's right of center is probably most visible. I think that one. They're working together with the designer at an easel rather than just sitting around with a scratch pad. And in the, we'll move to the center section. And I think I'm going to back up for just a moment because we didn't point out the king horse. This is a horse apparently covered with flowers, and sure enough, it is literally covered with roses. This is what Illions called the American Beauty in honor of the popular tea rose by that name, very popular at that time of the century, and still. And you can see the flowers. In this picture, I think, even though it's black and white, you can appreciate the luster of the mane in its flat ribbons. Can we? Oh yeah, let's look at that. It not only has a few flowers on the bridle, but I would like to point out this very typical forelock. It's on so many of Illions' outside horses. And in some cases, it arches above the surface of the head so that it usually breaks off over time. But look at the way these planes are bright with the reflected light. And then forward to the center, we can see a label on the organ front, and it's faint, but it says Columbia. I looked up to find what was a Columbia organ. Was it a brand of Wurlitzer? Where did it come from? Never found a clear story until the story came from China. Of all things, this organ has a label, the carousel rim is labeled. Holly, would you read this too?
Columbia Carousel Works, built by W.F. Mangels Company, Coney Island, New York.
Imagine. And at the base of the organ.
W.F. Mangels Company, Coney Island, New York.
So we're going to learn later that Illions offer in his early catalogs offered organs, but he pictured only European and acknowledged that he didn't do organs, but he could supply the best that were available in Europe, undoubtedly imported by Louis Berny in New York City. But here, within just a few years of saying that, he has a separately named factory producing these stock organs. Back to Savin Rock. As mentioned before, carousels do wear out. And sometimes accidents and fires destroy them altogether. In this case, this carousel was retired into a rather insubstantial barn-like warehouse. And one especially heavy winter, probably a ton of snow loaded the roof of that barn, so it collapsed. And all of that fell onto the pieces of this carousel inside. and it became a wreck. So it was fair game for any buyer. And the man whose name has escaped my brain this morning, who was developing Riverside Park in Agawam, New York, Agawam, Massachusetts, bought this machine reportedly for 100 pairs of rental roller skates for his rink. At any rate, it did need to be massively restored, and we'll go to Agawam now to see what came up. It has a flat band rim, but it's reminiscent in the shields, which are remnants from the shields car Illions made for his 3 Supremes and a 4th 4-abreast in the sesquicentennial exhibition in Philadelphia. They are 2 sort of naked angels emerging out of what I'll describe in part 2 as an acanthus chalice. Anyway, that's a hint that it may have been restored by Illions himself in 1939. He was in his late 60s and retired, but perhaps still able. Here we see more of the carousel itself, and we can see a couple approaching what looks like a fairly fancy archwork. And this carousel that just came on Facebook a week ago that another friend discovered, courtesy of John Caruso. The Facebook tradition now is that this arch was salvaged from an organ front in Savin Rock. What caught my attention was the horse that it arches over. That's a horse Joe and I recognized long ago when we received the Illions archives. It will be, of course, in the Illions archives, and it's marked by that inclusion as a favorite of Illions. We can also see it in our first micro view of the Illions paint shop picture. And Holly has zoomed in on the head itself. You can see its mane, you can see its little narrow beaded cheek piece. We won't even go down to prove that it's dappled and tasseled as the picture we saw on the Agawam machine. The point is, a lot of what Illions would call his favorites, and which are, we'll even get into this in this version because I haven't figured it out yet, but there's a chronological difference. If this horse was still in the Illions paint shop when a counterpart or somehow it was put on later in the 1909 Savin Rock carousel. I'll try not to get us all confused by that new factoid. Here we see it as we saw it in the paint shop. And it seems to be identical. It doesn't seem to be a duplicate. We'll learn later, very soon, that Illions did carve some duplicates of his own designated favorites. I think this has, never mind. This is our familiar American Beauty. Again, we can see it with more color in this close-up. We can also appreciate the light reflecting from those leafy manes. This is what Illions called, and who named these horses? Did Mangels specify that he wanted an Arabian horse and he should put Moorish crescents on each end of the animal? Or was that an Illions design? We'll never know who really argued these designs into wood. However, this horse is a little unusual. The mane looks more like a future type called the flamboyant, because it's all off the neck except for the lowest tier. And it's spread into two planes splitting apart from each other way up in the air. Something else about it is that it's not a very pleasant looking horse. It looks angry. Its ears are laid back. And as I promised, it has a mate that we discovered that was later in the Circus World's carousel. We see the same torso, apparently. There's now a lion's head on the breast and a totally different neck and harness and bridle. So having discovered this probably just a year ago, who are you?
Holly,
Thank you. I'm trying to call you Barbara now.
it's okay.
I do get mixed up at this point. Holly decided we would call this the angry Arabian.
Attentive.
Oh,
The other one
this
is the
is
angry.
the other one. Okay. This is the Agawam angry. I'm going to relax a moment. Excuse me, folks. Takes a drink of water. This Holly is called the attentive Arabian because he's kind of docile there, waiting for directions. And the other one, not that one, but this one, is the angry Arabian. That's the one on Agawam. The Agawam angry Arabian, AAA. Okay. Now we go to yet another favorite horse of Illions. I'm not sure why this fairly plain horse is such a favorite. My daughter Susie suggested it was because he was trying to compete with the famous and wonderfully carved Indian ponies of Daniel Muller. Whatever, this is the horse that we saw in the paint shop. And it's also, of course, in the archives. And here's the armored horse that we saw in a way in the previous merry-go-round. This one is different for the fact that it is signed by M. Illions, correct?
MC Illions.
MC Illions. And this is not just one of two outside armored horses. This one has 3 armored outside horses. This one is signed. The other 2, we'll see, are blaring out familiar Illions trademarks. He played on the fact that if he took 2 letters off his name, it was spelled lions. And he used lions all over the place. Holly pointed out yesterday that if you leave the letters off, his name spells Illions, but the lion we're going to see is quite healthy. Anyway, this has a breastband of 4 rampant lions. And the next armored horse we'll show has not only gorgeous trappings, but a lion on the headpiece. And of course, it's Illions' favorite of the group. And here it is in the archives. The lion is, of course, in the archives, as is the tiger. But the tiger on the machine is hiding something we just discovered in the last months and weeks, because behind this tiger is a masterpiece quality horse that I've never seen separate. So it has lived its life in the shadow of the tiger. And yet, if we look diagonally behind, there's this amazing horse. Let's go first up to the head covered with plates of mane, ribbons of mane, and drop straight down. There is what appears to be an animal crawling under the saddle itself. There's a bushy tail and paired claws clawing itself into the saddle. You see this claw right below the saddle, and then going further to the saddle, we see 4 legs pulling this apparent lion out of that cramped space. Never seen such a thing. It's kind of the ultimate lion toy. And it has all sorts of other typical Illions ornament. There are leathers on the front and this elaborate hanging down blanket with deep fringe lining the edge. It's some kind of horse in some kind of place, and it's part of the mystery of the once 7-knot carousel. And this is not the only hidden masterpiece. Here's one in the second row, which Joe and I discovered first in the archives. It's got rather handsome variations on the strap-like theme, and the mane comes from 2 directions and converges at the breast. It's kind of a W shape. Anyway, that's another one of the horses that's hidden away from ordinary spectator view. We'll finish this tour with the menagerie. Beyond the lion and tiger, there's the deer, oh my. And we see the organ front, at least the left-hand side of it. And back behind, just adjacent to the left-hand edge of the board, we have another one of those barber poles. In this case, if it had a cherub or a puto spinning on top of it, that has been lost, and what's up there is just a globe, a lamp globe. But that, folks, is the too much carousel, except it's even more too much for the fact that it bears now this mirror. I don't remember seeing the mirror. That's on the interior housing. I don't remember seeing it on early visits to Agawam. But if it was there, it would reinforce the assumption that Illions restored this and added a bit of his own. If not that, subsequent owners of Riverside Park, which includes Six Flags over New England, managed to change its name from the Mangels carousel to the Illions carousel. And maybe someone along the way discovered an authentic mirror or had one made. So we'll never know what we need to know about the Agilon, but it's a marvelous mystery. Now, from that pinnacle of success, we descend into a couple of years of estrangement, more and more resentment going on, publicly recognizing by friends. One group of friends tried to persuade Mangels and Illions to get together and do another merry-go-round. Everything was going south, and I'm losing my buttons now. And I want to back off from that to stay on a picture. Because in 1914, for the first time, Illions ads began appearing in local newspapers like the Brooklyn Eagle. It was not MC Illions and Sons, which became known, as we'll see a little later, but he was offering pieces of carousel carving as if he were clearing his shop to make room for a big job. There were 2 or 3 such teaser ads where he couldn't claim to sell a merry-go-round, let alone a whole merry-go-round horse. That was until June of thank you for buttoning my button. In Billboard, the national amusement magazine, June 20th, comes this ad, and I'm going to ask Holly. You are Holly, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Going to ask Holly to read his announcement here.
Carousel Works, the carousels that we manufacture of the latest and improved type with overhead transmission suitable for either park or portable purposes. Our figures are the only hand-sculpted figures now obtainable, and they are known the world over for their style and flash. Our carousels are not of the hobby horse type. Avoid this hobby horse proposition by looking us up, and in doing so, you will save yourself worry and money. Catalog free, MC Illions and Sons, Ocean Parkway.
There we have it. Thank you for the reading. He's saying it there, and to get the ultimate pronouncement, we'll see it in the catalog that he offers here for free. One thing that was happening at the same time is his hiring of a relative who was a photographer to make these epic pictures. Apparently in his plan to make a catalog for his upcoming business. So we see the paint shop and rather the carving shop and the paint shop. And all of this seems to circle around a man named I hope this wouldn't happen, but I forgot Henry's first name. Henry Stubman operated this Mangels carousel with Illions carvings at the east end of the amusement zone, the site later of the New York Aquarium. He also built a hotel named Hotel Eleanor after his daughter, which allowed him to sell alcohol on the premises through much of the prohibition. since it was a living establishment. So Stubman was able to visit the paint shop and see those future horses and make a bargain with Mike Illions that he would fund a renovation of his own machine if he could have some of that brand new futuristic stuff and some of the beautiful horses that were already in the barn, in the paint room. And apparently he did pretty well, because we can see the result of that renovation. We can also look first at the organ front, if Holly will describe it.
Oh, it's quite elaborate. It goes more than halfway around the center of the carousel, has many cherubs up on the top, and it has one right in the center that we think has cymbals or some sort of musical instruments that they're playing, along with carved beauties down below, reaching up to the cherub.
Thank you. Warn me when I'm running my cup over. And among the riding stock is a horse Joe and I recognized instantly in the photograph, but couldn't place it right away because this horse had been carved as a standing horse. And here on the new Stubman revision, it's a jumper. Answer is probably that Stubman got such a windfall with this group that he didn't have enough outside standing spaces. So he had Illions chop it down into a jumper. This is the horse that one of the guys titled the Southern Belle. Illions was profoundly proud of this horse, loved its name, so it's probably his, loved its name, and we've seen it in all kinds of calendars and books. We also see it here in the paint shop on a microscopic view. We see an inclined head, pretty mane, and down at the cantle, what many people see as a dark archangel. There's something menacing about the head that is there. We can go to the archives to see if there's any more detail on that, but it really doesn't show. It does show the typical profile that's been reduced so often. What I will show you next is the beautiful horse with its new legs provided by Marianne Stevens, but the setting is the funeral for Marianne Stevens. We had been invited, Joe and I, to give the eulogy to describe her place in the carousel world. And of course, the Southern Belle, her Southern Belle, was decorating the chapel. We can, since I have access to multiple views in the empty chapel, we can look at the four quarters, and you can see dangling down between the muzzle and the neck is a streak of gold, which has to be the very very narrow end of the fold-over mane at the very top of the neck. We can go around to the back to see if that's true. And sure enough, it not only falls down, but it falls straight down with no reinforcement attaching it to the neck. I don't know how this horse rode so long without having that torn off by some vandalous kid. We also see at the cantle what we couldn't see before. It's a child angel, not your regular adult, but a sweet-looking child. And we can look across the cantle to see at least the back of the evil, dark face, which is anything but evil, but perfectly bright and smiling from ear to ear with joy. His joy streams from the fact that he is privileged to spend the rest of his existence holding wings with his girlfriend across the horse. And that existence has a pretty good prospect, because this horse is now in the Brooklyn Museum as a gift from Marianne Stevens. Now we can look at the catalog Illions was offering for the kind of the end of the threat in the billboard ad. The catalog itself isn't very impressive. It was done in a hurry. Something interesting about it, though, is the date at the top. It says, I believe, established in 1879.
92.
Oh, thank you. Established in 1892. Well, in 1892, Illions was working for Loof in Brooklyn, hardly running a shop in Coney Island. The only thing relevant that happened in 1892 was his firstborn son. And so he could claim the title MC Illions and Sons. So Harry rules the roost on this one. Looking to the introductory page, we see toward the bottom a Declaration of Independence. We are no longer concerned with any
Connected with any concern.
we are no longer connected with any other concern. Should some of our masterpieces be shown on some other
Firm's catalog.
firm's catalog, it is due to our former connections. We no longer cater to the trade,
Frame maker.
I'm sorry. We no longer cater our trade to the frame maker. You have been watching the story of two men so alike in their nasty temperament and so needy of one another in the creations they made together. The story that asks the question, can these men, so different but so needy, find happiness working on their own? Or may there be, through some miracle to come, a chance for reconciliation of this part 2 of Alliance of Giants?
April.
Tune in April 3rd for that next chapter or installment of Giant Man. Never mind, that's it, folks.
Thank you, Raul. That was terrific. And we can now open it up for questions. Before we do that, I noticed that Barbara Charles is